Yo, I understand that we are on a budget from time to time. So I went ahead on TheCaliEffect.com and discounted so much merchandise so you can get your stuff for cheap, right? 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 What's going on with y'all, big dog? And it is an amazing Tuesday. It's actually Tier List Tuesday, where I try to make a tier list on every Tuesday. Not sure if that's gonna happen, but hey, we're here. In today's tier list, we are going to be going over some of the best budget competitive decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! But of course, yesterday I made a top 5 competitive budget decks for this format. If you want the deets on that particular video, go ahead and click on this. But right here, we're going to be talking about more decks in mass. So let's jump on into this budget tier list where we have 5 different categories. We got top budget. These are the decks that are the strongest of the strongest. Not only are they extremely budget inside of this Yu-Gi-Oh! Card game, they are also hyper competitive. From there, we got the next level budget or the next budget. These decks may not be as cheap and competitive as the top budget, but they're still really good budget decks. From there, I have Will Take Time. These are some decks that you can pretty much start off on a budget, but they get expensive as you go deeper. And then there's a hole in your wallet. It's pretty self-explanatory what a hole in your wallet means. These decks are pretty good, or just take a lot of money to pilot. Then there's everybody's favorite, oh no, what are you doing, baby? These are the strategies that are either way too expensive for their competition level or just not competitive at all. But let's go ahead and jump on into this budget tier list and start talking about Dino. I gotta say, honestly, if we're going to go with the most optimal build of Dino, it is a next budget level deck. And there's a good reasoning behind this. Yes, the Dino core is extremely cheap and you can pretty much make this deck fairly good on a budget. But if you want to play the most optimal of budget Dino decks, you're gonna have to get eventually small worlds inside of your deck, which are $35 a piece as of recording this video, or of course pot of prosperities, which are at least $100 a piece. And what really feels bad is that your boy has been trying to flip prosperities as I got 6 to get rid of and nobody wants them for some reason. Don't know why, but yeah, ultimately this deck can be won in Yu-Gi-Oh! On a cheap. But as you want to get to higher levels of competition, you are going to have to spend those big level monies to make this deck. From here, Burning Abyss is actually a top budget deck. Let's look at it. There are no real Burning Abyss cards that are extremely expensive unless you want original print like Dante Travelers of the Burning Abyss, Duelist Alliance First Edition. Other than that, the Burning Abyss strategy can be made on the drop of a dime. Orbital Hydrolander is a common. I mean, come on, how can you get better than that? Fairy Tale Snow is also a card that comes in common. This strategy is extremely cheap. I even built one for the Gauntlet series, which was a very fun video to do. And if you want to check out that video and help out the algorithm, go ahead. It'll even help me make another Gauntlet video. Adamantipator is actually the next budget, and not necessarily for the reason that Dinos are the next budget. Remember, I talked about how Dinos, you're going to need expensive cards. I don't think that Adamantipator is necessarily expensive in any way, shape, or form. The first card that does come to mind is the ever so sought after Kwakimaru Supplier. Didn't get a reprint inside of the 2022 Megatins, what made it shoot up to, I believe, a $13, $14 range, and you need 3 copies. And then, of course, there's Borreload Savage Dragon, a card that this deck very much plays well. So it is sneaky a little bit expensive, but not too expensive. The problem with Adamantimators is that it is a harder to play rogue deck inside of this format. So you really want to tread carefully when you want to build this deck. Unless y'all really want to be rocking with the big dogs, then yeah, you got to either know how to play this deck and then still have the expenses to be able to make this deck work. Moving forward, oh my God, Alistair the Invoker stands for Invoked Shaddoll. Now, I did talk about a Invoked Windwitch deck that I mentioned inside of the top 5 budget competitive decks. And that one's, I mean, I feel like that one's like the next budget, as it isn't as powerful as you would want it to be. And of course, you still will need cards like Pot of Prosperities to be able to make it as consistent as possible. But the Invoked Shaddoll version is a deck that will take a lot of time. Let's go ahead and face it. You're going to need those Destiny Hero Phoenix Enforcers, and you're going to need Fusion Destinies. Fortunately enough, Destiny Hero Dasher was just reprinted as a super rare, and it's coming as a secret rare inside of the GX Speed Duel box, which we're getting soon. But it doesn't change the fact that you're going to need expensive cards like Pot of Prosperity and the aforementioned Destiny Hero Phoenix Enforcer to make this deck work. But while you're on the quest of making this deck work, it does work fairly decently as a budget variant of it, so you can build up to make the most powerful invoked deck that you can. Moving forward, Altergeist, oh my god. Altergeist feels like top optimal budget because one of your most sought after cards for the Altergeist strategy did get a reprint so many times. Infinite Impermanence is a super rare for this strategy. On top of that, having cards like Pot of Extravagance, which are gold rare $10 cards, this is amazing. Yes, you could play Pot of Prosperity inside of your Altergeist deck, but you also, hold on, wait for it, you don't necessarily need to play Pot of Prosperity inside of Altergeist. It's been proven to be a successful deck without Pot of Prosperity. So this is one of the decks that if a player is an anti-meta player getting into the game, or maybe looking for another anti-meta field, Altergeist may be your deck that you may want to play. Cyber Dragon, oh my god, look, if I'm going to be so honest with you guys, this deck is a hole in your wallet. Now, Cyber Dragon can be built on the cheap, and if I were to say you build it on the cheap, it would be a will take time, mainly because, not because of its expense. I don't think there's any cards that would garner a huge price tag for Cyber Dragons off the top of my head. Maybe Cyber Dragon Hurts, I think that card has went up in price, but ultimately this deck isn't in its best spot right now. But if you are going to be collecting Cyber Dragons, you're probably going to be collecting Boss Dog Cyber Dragons, which are going to be ultimate rare Cyber Dragons and all of the other cool stuff, which is a hole in your wallet. Look, I think if there's any time to invest into the highest rarity of Cyber Dragons, the best time is right now, while the deck is not as competitive as it could be. And let's just go ahead and say that it's a hole in your wallet for that particular reason, because at the end of the day, you probably should be getting those high-end cards, because this is the lowest LP for, ever. Let's go ahead and talk about Ignisters. Ignisters are actually a top budget deck, another budget strategy that I mentioned inside of my budget video. So Ignisters are so amazing because not only is the entire core ridiculously cheap, some of the cards that you'll need for this strategy, like some of these other strategies I mentioned, will transfer over. Crossout Designator is a card that immediately comes to mind. Not only does this card is amazing right now because of how many hand traps are being played, it's a deck that seamlessly fits inside of this deck. There's also cards like Triple Tactics Talent, a card that you could get for the Ignister strategy if you wanted to play it. Not only does it give you the correct extenders, but a card that can transfer over to other decks and isn't extremely expensive like how it used to be. There's also the Access Code Talker. How could I forget about Access Code Talker? Definitely a card that you should be, maybe it'll get a reprint. Maybe I'm on that hopium. I'm believing for the reprint. But this is another card that is very versatile in so many strategies. I think actually every single one of these strategies can be playing Access Code Talker, and is a card that synergizes really well with this particular strategy. With that being said, it is not only a top budget deck, because not only can it compete fairly well at its lowest budget, including some additional cards makes this deck even better. Oh man, Despias. This is almost, oh no, what are you doing, baby? I'm just playing, guys. I still love Despia. I'm just playing. But to be honest with you, this deck is a complete hole in your wallet. Aluber, Jester of Despia is, don't look at that price tag, big dog. And that is mandatory, a mandatory 3-of for this deck. This is also a strategy that does use Incredible Ecclesia, another really expensive strategy. And what's worse, or expensive card, and what's worse about the Despia strategy is that while it is so expensive, it's not even a proven top tier deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! You are literally playing a top tier experience or a top tier amount of money for this deck, for a deck that isn't giving you top tier results right now. Now, will that change with the Despia, or I'm sorry, with the Fallen Albast structure deck? I think so. I think that it's on the right track. But for right now, it's definitely not a strategy if you are a budget player that you should even consider looking into. Zombie, oh my god, which is really unfortunate for Zombie because I feel like I've been hitting it from all sides. Yo, not only is Zombie not necessarily a great deck, there are other decks that can do it better. In the Zombie strategy, you're going to need 3 copies of Necrowolf Banshee. That is an expense. Doom King Balladrock, that is an expense. All for a deck that doesn't necessarily compete at the highest level. Ultimately, there is another strategy for you zombie lovers that you should be jumping on. And you can even include like one Necro War Banshee, which, you know, would still do the exact same thing for the other deck as it does for this deck and still be able to compete at a higher level. Dragon Maid, guys. Oh, man. I genuinely have to say, what card in Dragon Maids? I'm going to put it at the next budget. I think that there are hand traps that you'll need for Dragon Maid that'll obviously be expensive. Ash Blossom and Joy Spring is one that comes to mind. Whereas Burning Abyss, Altergeist, and Ignis don't necessarily need Ash Blossom to compete. Don't get me wrong, there are builds that will play Ash Blossom, but not necessarily a necessity. This deck needs the hand traps to be able, the strongest hand traps to be able to slow your opponent down. But ultimately, the Dragon Maid core is decently cheap. There are cards like Lorepar that stand out. And then Chamber Dragon Maid is kind of expensive when you combine it with some of the other Dragon Maid cards that you need to get. But ultimately, this deck is pretty budget-like. It's fairly competitive, and it can compete at some pretty decent levels. Drytron. Oh my gosh. Drytron is a strategy that 100% takes time to build. It's a very, very good strategy in Yu-Gi-Oh! Right now. Like, don't let what people say fool you. The problem is getting your Herald of the level 2 Herald card. The Herald, Diviner of Herald. That card is $50 each. That is, oh, es no bueno. That's expensive. There are also some other cards that Drytrons definitely need to consider. Forbidden Droplet may make you drop it down to here. And the reason why is because Appaloosa Bowl of the Goddess completely wrecks Drytron monsters unless you draw the Forbidden Droplet. Now, could I put it right here and say it will take time? Yeah, I actually believe so, because just like how this deck does need Pot of Prosperities, this deck will need Forbidden Droplets, and they're roughly the same cost. This deck also does need Diviner of Heralds, but you don't necessarily absolutely need those cards to compete when you're starting off. Mind you, of 10,000 hands is almost the exact same thing as Diviner of Herald without the level change and being able to send from the extra deck to the graveyard. Forbidden Chalice is also another great budget alternative to play around Appaloosa Bowl of the Goddess. So you can definitely play those type of cards until you build yourself to a better Drytron deck. Eldritch, guys. Eldritch, I want to say Eldritch is actually a top budget deck. I think that this deck is fairly budget. I can't think of anything except when you get to the other cards in Eldritch. So Eldritch currently, if you play pure Eldritch, the only thing that can come to mind that's super expensive is Skill Drain, which just got a reprint inside of the Hidden Arsenal Chapter 1. Go ahead and pick up those Skill Drains. I think this is the best time to pick them up, around this time when they get to fairly low, because not a lot of people are buying this set, and that will probably shoot back up. With that being said, other than that, Eldritch cards are fairly cheap because they got reprinted inside of the Maximum Gold set of El Dorado. But where this deck will take time is that a lot of Eldritch players have been running the Cybers engine, have been running the Adventure Token engine, they've been running Destiny Hero Phoenix Enforcer. And while Eldritch can compete without those cards, that has proven so far to be the most optimal build. So you can play a budget control version of Eldritch and then build your way up to a combo Eldritch that does play those Eldritch cards, basically how Eldritch used to be. So yeah, it's a deck that will take time to compete. Shaddolls, guys. Shaddolls, I'm going to say, Shaddolls are the next budget. Not a lot of people have paid too much attention to Shaddolls. Shaddolls are 100% the next budget. So as we get into a format where super polymerization becomes more and more scary, this is one of the best decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! To take advantage. Almost every single one of their extra deck monsters are fire! Except for Wendigo. You don't want to play Wendigo. The other ones are, even Anoyatilis, Grista, those are great cards. Sheki Naga, they're decently good cards. Very respectable stats and can punish your opponent while breaking the board. So one of the best decks to play super polymerization. Extremely cheap if you go for the super budget route for Shaddolls, mainly because it did have a structure deck to reprint some of those high sought after cards. And a pure route of Shaddol is not bad. A Magistus route or a Mathematician route, I would consider more as a pure version too. Really, really fun deck to play. I wouldn't say that it's extremely competitive, but it's definitely really, really budget when you consider how much Shaddol used to be and how cheap it can be. Live Twins. Oh my God, this deck is a hole in your wallet, guys. Not that it's bad. I don't think any of these decks are Despia or Live Twin are necessarily bad. You can go ahead and check out my meta tier list and even my rogue tier list to be able to confirm that, because these are really good decks. But in terms of expense, pay the piper. Yo, those Link Live Twin cards come up to some pretty decent prices a piece, and you need 3 in 2 copies or 3 in 3 copies, depending on what you're doing with this deck. And then, of course, it's a deck that kind of mandatorily has to play a lot of hand traps. Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring is not only a card that you need to play to stop your opponent, it's also a card that you need to play for cross-out detonators inside of this deck. So when you start to add up everything that comes inside of this deck, the core itself not necessarily being cheap, and then the hand traps that you kind of have to play, feel forced to play, and then the cards that counter your opponent's hand traps, this comes up to a pretty penny. Fluanderies. This was easily a top budget deck as stated in my budget tier list. I feel that Eldritch is a top budget deck too, but again, it's a deck that you can build over time. But Fluanderies is amazing, with only Rise of the Mega Monarch being the most, being an egregiously expensive card, everything else being ridiculously cheap for this deck. Gotta love it to this Fluanderies strategy, as it is a top contender inside of Yu-Gi-Oh! People don't just give it the credit that it deserves. Based. Based is a literal hole in your wallet, and there's multiple problems with Based in my opinion. Based won't be a deck that lasts forever, guys. It will not. Based, for the people that don't know, is Brave, which is Adventure Token, Artifact, Magician's Souls, I forget what the Destiny Hero, Phoenix Enforcer, and Dragons. It's literally, if you guys played in 2013, 14-ish, it's Hat. It's hand artifact trap tricks, except in this current day Yu-Gi-Oh! And it won't be a deck that will last forever, but it is a deck that is incredibly expensive. If you guys are jumping into games or into this game and looking for your first starter deck or whatever, don't build this deck, because again, this is a deck that is very volatile. It doesn't really do what you need it to do. It's a good deck, don't get me wrong. It's a tier 1 deck, but as far as from a budget perspective, a player jumping into the game, not worth it. Earth Machine is a top budget deck. Let's go. This deck literally can be built for under $100 competitively. It can be built for about under $100. And if you want to see a deck profile, let your boy Cali know. I got your back, big dog. That's gonna be a thing that can happen. Earth Machine is ridiculously cheap. I can't think of a single card that's expensive in here, like, whatsoever. I guess if you want to play Forbidden Droplets, but that's if you want to play Forbidden Droplets. There's also Ash Blossom if you want to play Ash Blossom. Like, it's nothing expensive in this deck. Everything has gotten reprinted to a pretty decent amount. Prank Kids. Oh man, Prank Kids is another top budget deck. Don't get me wrong, it's a top budget deck even without the adventure token stuff. Actually, I'm just gonna go ahead and put it as a top budget deck, because the adventure token stuff, I know it sounds expensive when I say $300, because that's like, yo, hold on, time out. I could get a lot of things with that. Do you know how many squamadas that is? Like, you need to chill. But other than that, I mean, you got to keep in mind that transfers over to other strategies, and Prank Kids are still really good even without the adventure token cards. Go ahead and post down below in the comment section, guys. What do you think about Prank Kids without it? But I'm going to go ahead and put in Will Take Time, because not only is the adventure token engine $300, Destiny Hero Phoenix Enforcer is another engine that you have to get for this deck. A lot of players are moving on to that as well. And that does take a decent amount of money. I think it's about $500-600 to be able to play this to the most highest level, which is a lot of money. But even playing it at the lowest level without those cards is still pretty good. Rockets, guys. Rockets will take time. Rockets will take time. Unfortunately, Chaos Spaces have skyrocketed in price. Well, fortunately, because I told my boys, buy these cards before they skyrocketed in price a long time ago, and Chaos Space was easily one of them. Porlo Savage Dragon is creeping up in price. There are some cards for Rocket Dragon Link that are definitely going up in price, and Dragon players that are getting into the game are suffering the consequences, which is unfortunate. But boy, this deck is so good right now. It's actually worth it if you want to invest the money, but it will take time to be able to make this deck the ultra very best. Solomon Gods, dudes, what's going on? I actually did snub them in the budget, top 5 budget decks, but it is an amazingly cheap deck. Not a single Solomon Great card being worth over a few bucks. Access Code Talker literally being the only card that you need is expensive. And then, of course, Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. So this deck is actually decently budget. I think it can be built at around $200, which, I mean, to be honest, if we're being real, it'll be right here, just because I don't think any of these decks require more than $100 to $120. So it's like, yeah, you kind of sit right here. Just for that reason, Ash Blossoms feel mandatory. Access Code to mandatory. I think Ash Blossoms are $30 a pop for the lowest. Access code talking about 50 a pop. But other than that, deck's stupid cheap. And unfortunately, nothing else in this deck kind of transfers over. Like, can't use Psynet Mighties and stuff in your other decks, unless you're playing Cyberse or stuff. Moving on, Sharks, baby. Sharks, I feel, are next budget. They'll be top budget when we get the Legendary Duelist set with the new water cards, because I'm strongly sure that they'll reprint, like, hopefully, Totally Awesomes. I'm pretty confident they'll reprint Promise Sharks. But right now, Totally Awesomes are $10 a pop. Utopic Draco Future, I believe, is $50 a pop. So those two cards are concerning. Beautiful Princess, another card I'm really hoping to get reprinted, is about $10-12 a pop for you guys. So it is sneakily expensive. This deck is sneakily expensive. Not really expensive, but more expensive than what you thought. Sky Strikers, guys. Oh, man. Sky Strikers are not really budget. I mean, if we're going to be real, and if Ray is your bae, then no, this deck is not cheap. Because you're getting Ulti Gagaris, you're getting Ulti Ates, Ulti Shizuku, you're getting all, yeah, that's not cheap. But if you're going like the lowest rarity, this deck is actually one of the better decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! It's a top contender. Really, really, really good deck. Sword Soul is 100% a hole in your wallet. If you're going pure Sword Soul, no disrespect to Sword Soul players. I think that, like, I don't know if you guys seen the meta tier list, but go ahead and check it out if you haven't. But in the meta tier list, I said that this was a tier 2 deck. And maybe that was a reach. Maybe, I think we've already admitted that was a little bit of reach. But we already said it was a hot take in the beginning. Sword Soul does not do better than Based or Tingy Synchro. But Sword Soul's still a very good deck. Don't get me wrong. Where's the problem with Sword Soul? Well, Moyi is $20. Feasible. You know, nothing really expensive. And then you get incredible Ecclesias, and you're like, yo, this kind of sucks. I feel like I can put it in the Will Take Time, because Ecclesias are transferable to the Despia strategy. But if you're trying to transfer to these both decks, they're both holes in your wallet. These are great decks. Don't get me wrong. Great deck, but very, very expensive for what they are. And a good thing about this is that this deck can be transferable. I think this deck will be here for formats to come. Phantom Knights, baby. If you are a big Phantom Knight player, this is a strategy that will take time. Your Phantom Knight cards, fortunately, are very, very cheap. Fogblade got a reprint for you boomers in Yu-Gi-Oh! So there's that. Phantom Knight Torn Scales got a reprint in Ultra Rare for you Zoomers that want to play that particular card. Destiny Hero Phoenix Enforcer is a card. Forbidden Droplets are cards. So it will take time to be able to construct this deck. But during that time, you can actually experiment with other Phantom Knight builds and stuff like that, which makes this deck really fun. Tri-Brigade, another top budget Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck, boys. Tri-Brigade is easily one of the cheapest, best decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! It's not necessarily a top deck. I will put it in the tier 2 category, I believe. I put it in the meta tier list. Again, check that one out, boy. Playing with you. And it's an extremely good deck when it comes to price. I think this deck can be built for, like, seriously? Like $60, which is ridiculously cheap. Like, if I were to get a beginner in Yu-Gi-Oh!, I'd probably point them this way. And there are so many ways to build this deck. So really, really cheap. And then Virtual World is easily the next budget. Really good to see there's no, oh no, what are you doing, babies? But we'll talk about it, no, what are you doing, baby, in a second. Virtual World is really good by itself, but it's starting to become a strategy where you kind of want to put the Adventure Token Engine. That's where it's most optimal. But a Punk version of this deck is also really good. And Punk is fairly cheap depending on which versions you're getting, which I'm assuming a cheap version. So it's definitely a next budget. I think the most optimal version would be the Rite of Air Macier Adventure Token Engine, which does make this deck fairly expensive in the long run, $300 additional dollars. But if you're playing any other version, oh, and then Baron de Flor, never mind. This is kind of expensive, almost like will take time. But a definite, oh no, what are you doing, baby? Is you not checking out my website? Go to TheCaliEffect.com. Like I said before, we are having a huge blowout sale, getting rid of all of the inventory that we have, as we are going to be sweeping in with a brand new wave of inventory. It's going to be extremely exciting to be able to show you this stuff. So go ahead and pick up all this stuff that we got. I'll even be able to have a boneyard type of thing where we have a couple of mats that'll even be cheaper than what we have going on for our sale. These are mats that didn't pass our perfections test because we're perfectionists, but are still very usable for you to have. But with that being said, thank you so much for watching, guys. I appreciate you guys. It's been amazing going over these tier lists. And what other type of tier list do you want to see? Should Tier List Tuesday be something that should be a thing? Maybe every Tuesday we do a tier list? I don't know. I think we got to figure something out. As always, you can go ahead and check out these videos as I'll catch you on the next one.